Hey, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to Keep It Spiritually Simple. I'm your host, Sandra McEllis. And before we introduce our beautiful guest, let me just remind you that every single like, subscribe, and share helps the algorithms of this show circulate so others may have that broadcast onto their social media and they can catch our show and they can like, subscribe, and share. So, everybody, right now, give me the finger. Come on. Appreciate it. Okay. Well, everyone, when I say give me the finger, people are like, what? Yeah. Okay. You can give me that finger too. It won't phase me. Okay. So today we're going to talk about what it is to kind of first wake up. What do you do with it? What are you realizing? How do you feel? Where do you go? How do you keep going up? Do you stay stuck? Like, what's going on? And we are here with Ruthie Benninger, and she is a galactic star keeper. And I had the pleasure of meeting this beautiful soul last month. And I also had the pleasure of crawling onto her table and having an amazing session. So her links will be below the description when we're all done. So if you want to take a look at that and how you can connect, save your hunting until the very end. So welcome, Ruthie. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So, oh my gosh, we're waking up and we realize, where in this box are we? What is happening? Actually, am I in a box? Did I create this box? Was I born into this box? And then after I identify it, how do I maneuver through it so I can stretch and expand and realize that I was twisted and contorted in this small world of thinking that we call our life in the now moment? So, how do we go from now to there? And what are some of the experiences of the waking up? So, do tell.
Well, for me personally, and everybody's got their version of their truth, right? That was part of the lesson that I had to learn. Was it started out with realizing that my reality, what I remembered as my truth, uh, started to not match everybody else's reality. I didn't know back then, and we're talking over 10 years ago, right? Um, you know, I didn't know anything about a Mandela effect like I do now, right? And I remember experiencing time slips or memory slips or buildings that didn't look familiar to me all of a sudden, right? And specifically, what happened was, at the time when I was married, my husband was driving down, like we were going to pick up the kids from school, and I looked over. I'm like, when did they build that building? He's like, what are you talking about? That's always been there. I'm like, oh my God, what? Like little things like that, right? Like, I don't remember that being there. I don't remember that tree being there. I don't, whatever it was that I kept pointing out to him, he got really concerned. He was like, what's wrong with you? Right. And I didn't know how to explain it, but I thought I was having like a panic attack. Right. And I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know if I'm doing the thing again. Right. That's what I called it because, growing up, I've always been able to see things that others could not perceive in their reality. And I didn't know that that wasn't a common trait for most people. The way I figured it out was I have a twin sister, fraternal twin sister. We shared a room, and I would see shadow people in my bedroom, right? I would wake her up and say, do you see that person in the corner there? She's like, there's nobody there. And I'm like, I'm like, oh. That's how I figured out that I was, my reality was far different than the average person, right? So as a kid, I remember saying to myself, it's like I'm cursed because they could not relate. They couldn't tell me what I was experiencing. I would go to my mom. She would just refer me back to religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being raised Roman Catholic, she put the fear of God in me for the first time. That's where I want to say for me, the trauma, having an ability to see the spirit realm, began. And I tried shutting it down, through my teens, right? I hit a certain age around 20, 25, looked at the ability again to see if it was there, and it was like an explosion in my head. It was like pressure was building up, building up, building up, and when I released it, everything started flooding back into my awareness again, right? And I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know what was wrong with me again. I would just, assume that it was, like my mom, she always felt that I was very sensitive, right? But not sensitive in the way that, we use that term now. She's just dramatic, right? It was very
Mm-hmm.
dramatic
Mm-hmm.
as a young adult, right? Like, so I was told my whole entire, life, like you're growing up, it's in your head, it's your imagination, right? So when I was relating these stories to my husband, and this was like when we were dating, I was like, I don't know if you want to mess with somebody like me because I'm not the average person. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're going to get to know me. You better know that I see things. And I don't know if they're real. I don't know if they're hallucinations. I don't know. But I'll see people talk to me, loved ones. I could, they come to me at night. So if we're going to share a bed, right, we're going to get married. Um, it's
You
going to be,
better be ready for some visitors.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
And
it's
like,
either be ready or run now.
yeah. So he knew what he was signing up for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I was very clear with, um, the child, the trauma that I went through as a child. I shared it all with him because I had nobody else, who's going to believe me, right? Who I had nobody I could turn to, including afraid of the church,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, my mom always said to pray to Jesus, pray to the angels, right? She never said how to do it. She just said, do it. So my understanding of how to do it was just like how you and I are talking right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Face to face, right?
Yes.
So I would have visitations from, from heaven in my room, right? Um, and I was like 5 years old, overhearing this argument, that my parents were having. And my mom just kept asking my dad, what do I do? What do I do? And I remember, oh, I'm going to ask, Jesus tonight, what the answer is, right? And I innocently called him in like I always did, and he would show up. I physically saw him manifest, he would sit at the edge of my bed and he would talk to me, right? And I asked him, how do I help my parents? How do I help my mom? She's crying about, this thing that needs to be paid, or she doesn't know the answer of how to do this thing, or whatever it was at the time, right? I was too young to understand, the workings of, you know, um, finances at that time, right? So he gave me the answer. He said, "I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you what she needs to, what she needs to know." The next day, I go and I tell her, right? And she said, "Who told you that? Did you ever hear your dad and I talking?" I'm like, "No." She said, "Well, where'd you get that information from? Because that actually happened today. And how would you know that?" And I said, "I prayed to Jesus. Jesus told me," right? She's like, "No, no, 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 no." She's like, "What do you mean Jesus told you?" I said, "Doesn't it say ask and you shall receive?" Right? You
Mm-hmm.
have to ask. And she said, explain to me what exactly did he say to you? I said, well, he pops through the window, he sits at the edge of my bed, and he was explaining to me, the answer to your problem. She's like, wait, you see him? I'm like, yeah. You don't know who you're talking to. I'm like, what do you mean I don't know who I'm talking to? She said, how do you know that that's Jesus? I'm like, because that's who comes in the window every time I call him. That was, think about a little kid, right?
Mhm.
That's like the most that you're going to get from a kid. Um, she was like, that could be false light. And I'm like, there's such a thing? She's like, oh yeah, demons. She's like, they masquerade and they can pretend that they're anything and trick you into believing it. I'm like, holy moly. I'm like, I never thought of that or never had I've never heard anybody talk like that, not even in church, right? And I said, and you know how kids are, they're like, ooh, whatever demon's going to do that, it's going to get in trouble. That was like the most of my comprehension at that age, right?
Mhm.
Until she said to me, promise me you're not going to do that again. She put really put the fear of God in me. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, okay, how do you do it then? She said, silently in your heart or in your mind. She's like, that's how you pray. I'm like, silent. I'm like, everybody in church is singing and praising God out loud. Why would you, like, they don't tell you to sit in church and be silent. They make you read the scripture.
Right.
And she said, that's how you're supposed to do. Like, don't question me. That saying, do as I say, not as I do, right?
Mhm.
So the next night I went to bed and I forgot because, you're a kid, you forget. And I'm like praying and here comes Jesus, right? And I go, oh, wait, I'm not supposed to talk to you this way. And he looked at me very concerned, like, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm supposed to honor my mom, right? My parents. I, you know, my mom said, I'm not supposed to talk to you in this form, in this way. He said, I will honor your wishes, right? He says, I will honor what you're asking of me. He said, but just so you know, he says, when you are ready, I will be back, right? I didn't know what that meant. I was like, okay, never saw him again, right? I started being, that was like probably the beginning of being really programmed, right? Following following orders, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, I was in my late 30s and my first son, was diagnosed at the age of 2 with autism, right? And I was like, uh-oh. I'm like, it was something that was, again, very, just like the Mandela effect, very new to the collective, right? Nobody really knew what was wrong with these kids. Nobody could really explain what was wrong with them. He wasn't hitting his milestones, right? And as a kid growing up, I was diagnosed at the age of 7 with dyslexia. So I know now what that means to be dyslexic. I understand now what I called a curse as a child for being able to see spirits and to see timelines and, you know, to see future events before they happened. I get it, what that is being dyslexic. I could never write with my right hand. And that was another form of, programming, right? To assimilate, they want you to be right-handed. So you think with, the left side of your brain, right? But my whole ability came from the right side of the brain, the connection to music, the arts, essentially that's the connection to the higher realms, right? And that's why even in school, they taught my mom, she was raised, you know, um, in a very strict school system where they would strike your hand with a ruler, right, if you were writing with the wrong hand when she was a kid. So I understand now that that ability is what kept me in the higher realms of consciousness, so to say, what they call daydreamer. I was a daydreamer. I was always yelled at for not paying attention in class. Again, these titles, oh, she has dyslexia. Well, in the 80s, I was bullied, right? And I grew up in New York, in Queens. And when my son was diagnosed with autism, I said, oh my God, he's going to be bullied. Like in school, when he starts school, like, what am I going to do? I have to help my son. And that was the catalyst for getting me to call Jesus back into my awareness, right? I said to Jesus, I'm like, I'm not afraid of you. Like, I know that you're there. I know you're listening. I'm not afraid of seeing you again, right? And just like that, when I called him in, boom, he was right in front of me. And the first thing he said to me was, he was very clear with me. He said, do not worry about what your mother believes, about what your sister believes. He says, they are on their own path. He said, what is your truth? And I knew that he was waiting all that time for me to call him back just to point out that the reason why I blocked him from coming it to me in the physical was because of belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
That I was following their agenda, not mine, right? Because he said to me, to thy own self be true. What is your truth? And I sat there and I looked at him and I was like, is that it? Is that really all that this is all about? Right? Could it be that simple? He said to me, you can create your heaven or you can create your hell, but you are the one creating it. Right? And I was like, oh my God, what is my truth? And it's funny because you know how they say you come into this reality, you choose your parents, supposedly choose your name, right? You've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
As a kid, my dad would say, Ruthie, are you telling me the truth? And I'm like, Dad, you can't spell truth without Ruth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, you're right. But he was a smart ass. So he would be like, you can't spell ruthless either without Ruth, right? And I'm like, well, then I'll be ruthless about the truth. Right. And I believe that was why I was always, told to be quiet, right? To shut up because I was too truthful with my actions, with my words, with my energy, right? My dad would say, if it's on the lung, it's on the tongue. He always said that I had no filter, right? It would just like whoop, right? It would just come out. And I had to learn how to navigate consciousness by, how do I say this? Not revealing everything that I could see and everything that I could hear, because people weren't ready for that, right? They did, but I used it to my advantage, right? I could read energy. I could read their intentions. I could read, where they were going in their minds. They didn't know I could do that. So I just played dumb. I just like, okay, I got your number, right? I see where you're going. And I think that it was a skill set that I had to learn in order to survive as a kid growing up in New York. My dad, he was very good at telling me growing up. He said, you have to be street smart, right? He said, oh, he's like, you could read all the books you want, Ruthie. You could be book smart. He said, but the real skills is being street smart. He said that's the survival technique that you need in this world. He said, because when you grow up and you become part, when you start working with people and you start working in the public, he said, though, that's how you have to be on your game, right? You have to be alert. You have to be confident, and he's like, you have to remember, everybody here is here, and they're in their own survival game, right? They're here just making it to the next day, right? And you're going to find yourself in that same position, right? But I remember thinking to myself, it shouldn't be this complicated, right? It shouldn't be this hard. Um, Going back to my son being diagnosed at the age of 2, my husband was just convinced that, doctors, medicine, the Western way of doing things, right, was the only way. That's all he knew. And that was, he went along with whatever, you know, regimens, programs, medicines that they were offering at the time, right, for my son. And I looked at it and I said, no, no. I said to him, I don't have the luxury to wait for science to catch up with what I already know is going on with them. And he says, his answer was, all right, so you think you're better? You think you're better than them? I'm like, that thing called mother's intuition? I think I know my son. you know,
Mm-hmm.
I know when he looks at me when he's hungry. I know when he's cranky, what that means, that he's tired, when he starts crying. I already know the cues. I'm like, so he's nonverbal. He's not hitting all of his milestones. It's like, to me, the way I looked at him was he was up in dream time too much, or I didn't have the wording for it, but I knew he was doing what I could do. He was a daydreamer. He wasn't focused on this reality because his eyes were always up. He was always looking up. And I swear to you, it looked like he was talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
He would look in the corner and I would sense something in the corner myself. And both of us look at the corner at the same time. And I'm like, uh-oh. Right? I would catch him scripting, because he did talk, but it was scripting. And I would hear things like, things that I never taught him. Little songs. I'm like, where do you learn that? But he would never perform in front of my husband to show that, he always made me sound crazy. Like my
Mm-hmm.
husband says, like, oh, you're just making that up. I'm like, I'm not trying to tell you that he's faking it, but sometimes I wonder, right? I don't know how to explain this to you, but it's like he knows how to play the game on a different level, but he knows that I'm onto him. So he can't hide the fact that I see that he's talking to somebody, or he sees things because he's drawing at the age, by the time he was 5, he was drawing, right? And he would draw the same thing over and over and over again. And essentially what it looked like to me were like robots, right? And I was realizing that he was writing codes, number, how kids, on the spectrum, they said they're like, they love numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So we would take little walks in the neighborhood and he would read all the numbers on the street. He was always reading numbers, right? Like it was a language to him, right? I didn't know what that was. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that he was showing me what he was drawing. He would draw, I'd say to him, draw mommy, right? He'd draw like a little circle, a little stick figure, and he'd go, mommy. But then he would take the color purple and draw a circle around me in purple.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that? And I'm like, okay, draw daddy. Draw a little, same thing and he would be like, daddy. And then he would take like another color, yellow, and put it around him. And I was like, that's fascinating. What did not know he was seeing auras.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He was drawing auras.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with the numbers, the matrix. He was showing me he could see the matrix, right? Um, so going back to the visitation with Jesus, right? And him telling me that there was nothing wrong with my son. So there's nothing wrong with your son. He said to me, this society will see him as he's sick. I tell you, he is not, is what he said. He said to me, I said to him, can you heal him? He said, he's going to heal himself. And I was like, what? Like, I was like, is there something that I need to do? He said, yes. He said, healer, heal thyself. I'm like, Jesus just called me a healer, right? Didn't have, I didn't know. He said to me, you know, to thy own self be true, right? He said, what is your truth? He said, I came here not as your savior. I tell you not. He said, man, created me as their savior. He said, I came here to teach my people the way, right? And I was like, fascinating. He said to me, he said, you're here to save yourself, right? And I was like, I'm here to save myself. And then he said, yes. He said, I taught my people that they can do all these great things and more, right? He said, so basically he was like putting the power back in my hands, right? Um, and I thought when he said heal or heal thyself, I believed that my job was to learn how to do the laying of the hands, like what he could do, right? Because he was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He did not correct me. He didn't say anything further than that. He just basically left it like, he said, what you call a curse, he said to me, is actually a blessing. He said it was never a curse. He said, to me, what you do in the future with it is miraculous. So he was very confident in the way he looked at me, like, you have this within you, right? Like, this will be unlocked. Like you will use this to your benefit, right? And then he said, as far as being a teacher, but as far as him teaching, right, his teachings, he said, once I remember it, I will teach others, right? And that's where I was like, whoa, I have to put myself out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself, who's going to listen to me? Because nobody's ever listened to me. I used to warn people all the time as a kid. I would tell my parents things and they would shut me down. So I had to heal, right? That version of self that didn't believe I was worthy of having somebody's attention and to be sought and to be looked at as a truth, somebody who's speaking their truth and, walking their walk, right? Like, so I just decided to trust. I trusted that it was going to come to me and I was going to be divinely guided. And that's where the, spirit guide came in. So I guess, looks like we're short on time right now.
Well, we'll talk about the spirit guide on another session. So
That
let's
was the
let's
intro.
quickly, yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna definitely do that. That's for sure. But let's go back to we're awakening. We're
Yes.
realizing we're in a box, matrix,
Yes.
whatever you want to call it. And it doesn't matter who put us there, how we got there. We're just there and we're awakening to it. What steps do we recommend to release ourselves or take the walls down and move forward from that space and place in the now moment?
So that's where the spirit guide, the guidance, so if you look at it, Jesus set the stage for me, right?
Yes.
He said, just follow your truth. And what he said was to me was, your truth will change. Meaning everybody is fixated. Society is It's water and oil do not mix, right? That's like everybody's truth, right?
But they're the greatest complement of two things ever. And they are in so many things that cannot be made without that combination. So I never have fallen into, oh, oil and water don't mix. Two people in that room, one's oil, one's water. One has to leave because like, no, you're two powerful complements to each other that make up so many different recipes and ingredients. And it wouldn't be the same if there was only one. So yeah. Anyway, go ahead about that.
That
Sorry.
goes hand in hand with truth, right?
Yes.
So, we are told at a very young age, it's like the collective consciousness. The sky is blue, an apple is red. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
basic belief systems, right? That
Mm-hmm.
everybody agrees, the collective agrees. So what he said to me, this I do give him credit for. He broke the first filter because that's what he called it. They're filters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first one that he broke was, he says to me, I know you believe gravity is what holds you down. And I'm like, well, yeah. He said, until somebody shows you how to spin your chakras and then you levitate, then that becomes your truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm like, chakras, what are those? In my head, because I swear I didn't know anything about energy systems, meridians, all this stuff that's like new age, popular. This was like, we're still talking about over 10 years ago for me, right? And I was still very much coming out of the religious programming for me. That was, but I was like, interesting. So he said to me basically about truth. He said, everybody has their truth. He says, from their perspective, where their consciousness resides, that's going to be their truth. Because your beliefs become your life. It's that simple, right? You will attract people, you will go to places, you will follow, based on your belief system. It's like a simulate, right? So for him to break the first, you know, um, filter, right? I was like, fascinating. He said, I taught my people how to walk on water. He said, but they were, he was talking about specifically, he was talking about Peter for me. He was using references that I could understand, right? He said, but notice, you know, he was afraid. Fear. He said, fear is what stops people from reaching that level of mastery, right? So he looked at me. He said again, what is your truth? And I was like, okay. He's, like, you hear the saying, fear not, right? It's just false evidence appearing real, right? So I learned not to be afraid of what I could do because I never even gave myself the opportunity to even try it. So my question to him was, all right, since you say I'm not supposed to have fear connected to this, I said, how do you walk on water? I wanted to know, right? He laughed because he has a good sense of humor. He's like, I will tell you, my dear child, how to walk on water. He said, when your third eye is fully functioning, because it was calcified, right? He said, when your third eye is fully functioning, you will see everything as a wave. Light and sound, everything is a wave. Just like water, he said, you see waves. He said, so you become the water. I'm like, what? You become the water. He said, you match its frequency, you match its resonance tone. You can see with your third eye the wave that will hold your body, and then you may walk on it because it will support the weight of your body. I'm like, whoa. And I wasn't even focusing on that. I was focusing on the fact that he said everything's a waveform.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, everything's a waveform. That's where I started connecting dots, right? And then so he left it at that. I realized I had more to learn, right? But um essentially, what we know now, what they call the light body, right? They say we're made of light, and that's why these enlightened ones, they glow, right? What's a halo, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you see, it's the light body, it's the consciousness. Like you're breaking so many filters that you glow with a halo,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's where my spirit guide, he broke it down into such a simple, he made it so simple for me for it to be relatable, you know, like what does this all mean? And how do you work with that from that perspective? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I flipped the script on myself. I wanted to see my reality through the eyes of the spirit world. I flipped it. I didn't want to see it through the Western, belief system. I didn't want to see it through what, the dogma that we're taught, right? I wanted to know what the heck do they know when they're looking at me, and who am I to them? That's what basically set the stage for you know, the next level of consciousness expansion.
Mm-hmm. So would you suggest for people to, they don't necessarily have to call on a religious dogma simply because everyone has different belief systems. I've been adverse to the name Jesus since I was a very small child because I was always told that wasn't his name.
True.
And I never understood any of it anyway. And so I can relate to a lot of things that you're saying. Um, but this isn't about me. This is just about me as an awakened person listening to your story and trying to put together perhaps a question that the audience or the viewers could take away with. And that would be, what could you name maybe one step if someone's awakening and realizing that they are in this boxed in matrix of all these different programs? What's one of the first things they could do to help them sort of connect with their breath and realize that, okay, other people have gone before me. I could certainly tune into the Sandy show, right? Keep it spiritually simple. I could listen to Ruthie's story and other Ruthies of the world
Yeah.
that are on this show. But what would you suggest that people could do to open the door for themselves and feel like they're a-okay? It's not too far fetched. What would be a baby step?
So, and that's funny. That was literally what my spirit guide started out. He said, Ruthie, you have to crawl before you walk,
There
right?
you go.
You're not gonna walk on water tomorrow. You have to
Oh,
crawl.
there's a reason why my guy just said baby.
Yeah,
I mean, short step or whatever it was. I don't even. Anytime they say something, it goes. It comes out of my mouth and I forget what it is. So
right.
a small step that isn't too far fetched, I think, is what they said.
That was basically it. He said you have to crawl. So crawling for him meant, he said to me, Ruthie, think about it like this. All is in the now, right? He said there's a version of you right now that needs you to be her spirit guide. And I'm like, what? He's like, just like I am for you, you have to be that way for your inner child. He said all the things that got you to this, to us talking, was if your mother didn't stop you, right? If you decided to be rebellious and decided to say, well, that's just her belief system. I know the truth. I know that he's of light, he's of love, because I never felt threatened by him, right? He's like, he goes, you need to learn discernment, right? And he said to me, but what you need to do is you need to learn how to love yourself. That's it. He said, to start out, he said, the reason why you don't trust yourself is because you never learned how to nurture yourself in a loving way where you always listen to the guidance within, right? How many times in our reality growing up did you yell at yourself for saying, oh my God, I knew it. I shouldn't have done that thing. Or I had a feeling, I had a gut feeling. Like, yeah. He says, trust that inner guidance. You don't trust it because you don't trust yourself. You don't love yourself, right? So part of the message from Yeshua, you know, was love thyself, know thyself, trust thyself, to thy own self be true. It goes back to your truth, right? So my truth as a child was I believed in magic. I believed in fairies and I believed in unicorns, right? I loved stickers with like fairies and wings and things that sparkled. And he goes, so my spirit guide looks around, he goes, I don't see any unicorns, Ruthie. I'm like, holy crap. So I started collecting and gifting my inner child the things that my parents said no to, right? So I started taking myself out for, you know, like little dates, like, okay, what do you want to do today, Ruthie? Right? Inner child. And I would be drawn to like a little shop or a little boutique, and there was a unicorn. And I'm like, good, I'm gonna buy it. Right? And I started collecting the things that brought me joy. And every time I would look at it, I would look at a little tiny unicorn or look at something that made me laugh or giggle. It was me healing the inner child, right? Because I was honoring myself for the first time. So he said to me, my spirit guide, he's like, exactly. He's like, you got to be playful. You have to be playful with consciousness. He's like, just like Jesus said, don't be afraid. But you also have to understand, he said, where you are in your consciousness, and what people don't get is you're in the lowest rung on your tree of knowledge, tree of wisdom, right? You're in the roots. He said, so you're the most powerful, yet the dumbest. That's what he said. And I'm like, interesting. He said, exactly. He's like, this is what they fear. This is what they don't want you to know. And this is what Yeshua preached.
So basically, what I'm hearing right now is, let's just say, you know, you realize you're in a box, you realize you're in the matrix, you come to this realization, you come to this disbelief, this shock factor of, holy crap, the world is not what everyone has made it out to be. And here I am, and I feel alone in the spotlight. And once I get past the holy crap shock disbelief factor, perhaps find the frequency of joy or elation, that this is a discovery that you've awakened to, and perhaps try to maintain that joy, that happiness, that frequency, and allow it to guide you to the next step. It could be just that simple. It's what I was just getting that message for. It doesn't have to be, okay, so now once you realize this, you know, step 2 is this, step 3 is this, because it is, as you were saying, a whole self-discovery of love thyself. And you have to love yourself through exploring. And exploring means you have to discover parts of yourself that may have been hissed upon, is the word I'm hearing, hissed upon and squelched as a child, instead of embraced as innocence and, whoa, that could be kind of cool. We get a lot of squelching, and we can't do the blame game and get angry, but maybe look at that, go into some self-nurturing, some inner child care, and the innocence of who we are in this newness of realizing that the box is open, the walls are down, life is different, and how do I want to move forward?
That's it. Setting the stage for basically rebirthing yourself to remembering who you are, essentially, um, you, a lot of people say this, that we're not humans having a human experience, right? Essentially, we're spirits having a human experience, and just flipping the perspective, right?
Yeah, you're
That
not a human possessed by the spirit. But occasionally you do feel locked in this physical body because your spirit really just wants to soar and play and go and be creative and discover and go to, places and planes unknown and make it fun like your inner child does. So
right.
yeah, I mean but we are living a human experience. We need to get more connected to our spirit. And the more we do that, the more we see the fence lines being removed, the boundaries falling down, and that there are open plains of vast, unexplored areas that you can go in. And again, it doesn't have to be you're the first to do it because other people have gone before you, right? So you can connect with people like Ruthie or myself or other people that are on the show and connect with people that can maybe help you on the journey and give you maybe a little self-starter kit, of information to get you going. So does that make sense?
Yes. I used to tell clients, because I do a form of regression healing, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
my modality. It's an interdimensional regression healing, and it's connecting the circuit of consciousness back to, this little light of mine,
Yeah.
right? Let
Yeah.
it
The
shine.
song I always love to sing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that I asked the inner child, the last question that I asked is, "What do you love?" Right? And I find it interesting how difficult that is for an unhealed inner child to say, what do they love? Because that's the first thing they try to knock out of you, right? When you're growing up, they tell you, act your age, my dad, act your age, not your shoe size, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, sit with it and figure out what you love, because essentially that's the purpose in my mind, is to follow your bliss, right? Follow your internal light. Um, you know, call in your tribe, call in the people that you can play with, right? They're not going to judge you, right? They're going to support you, and um, they need a playmate too.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're all part of you, whether you think they're fragmented or not, or because it's in the imagination that creativity begins, and then you can build your own architectural design of how you want your life, and then it gets imprinted in your DNA, and then your physical follows. So I think that's super important. Well, Ruthie, this has been a real pleasure. We could talk for hours. We're definitely going to have you back on. Everybody, you can go to galacticstarkeepers.com. You can look up what she does, maybe get a session. If any of you are headed to Sedona or you live in the nearby area, I would suggest you get on her site and get an appointment because she does get booked up. I was lucky to get squeezed in because I had a few connections in the higher realms that connected
Right
us for
around.
sure. They're like, oops, there you go. You're going to get squeezed her in for an appointment. It's like, oh, okay, let's go. And it was very impromptu and it was very powerful. And it helped to connect some areas of mine that I thought, as a highly evolved person, were already connected. But what it did was it just plugged things in more securely. And so there's a little bit more of the circuit board is not rattling as as much as it was prior. Um, but anyway, this has just been a real honor, and I would really very much love to have you come on. Is there something else you want to share with the audience before we sign off? And
Yeah, the way I see, the little light in me, or the little light in us, right,
mhm.
is creator, source. I see creation, how creation it has, be playful with your creations, right? Because
Mhm.
essentially you are the one creating your reality. But the most powerful part to us is the inner child. And I believe that that's what's coming back online, and honoring yourself um, as the creator being that we are. So,
Yes, thank you. Very well said. And I really loved what you said in the beginning, that you could see things that others could not receive in their reality. And I think you said it like that. I'm not sure, but that's what I wrote down. That's how I translated it. And I thought, wow, that is so powerful, because the more we go through the levels of this obstacle course and redefine what life is without the programs, we walk hand in hand with our higher self and collect more of guide teams as we need them, because sometimes we graduate the guide team and maybe another professor needs to come in, just what happens as you climb the ladder in the life of school. But we do see things that other people might not receive in their own reality, because they're not perceiving it, because they're not as connected. And we're all able to connect. It's just, how much work do you want to do on yourself and heal thyself, and what frequency keeps you in out of the maintenance shop? What frequency keeps you in homeostasis? What frequency keeps you from wrecking anything, right? It's like, how can you balance that alignment in this world of, there is no script, there is no book, but there are people who have lived it, who can offer tools and techniques and tips and tricks and all kinds of other things that you can see if they work for you. So it's by choice. So thank you everyone for tuning in to Keeping It Spiritually Simple. And I really do ask that each and every one of you take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. If you are on the Spotify, Amazon, iHeart podcasting side of it, you might want to hop over to YouTube and see what we look like, and still like, subscribe, and share there, and leave us a comment. And if you have a question, we will do our best to answer that. And then look for the next podcast with Ruthie on it. And we've got a whole list of amazing people coming on the next couple months to talk about some things that may resonate with you, or open and expand the outer worlds of the inner mind that you've been confined to living, and thinking that that's the borders where you're supposed to stay safe. And that's what we're here to teach you, is to say, get on those outer borders, dip your toe in, and we're here to assist you. All right, Ruthie, I'm going to say goodbye. It was awesome to see you, sister. So
yeah,
goodbye,
thank you.
everybody.